Indian economy 1950 to 1990. Today we are reading Indian Economy Development NCERT 11th. Second chapter was Indian Economy 1950-1990. Okay. After studying this chapter, the learned will come to know the goal of Indian 5 years plan. Okay. What is India's 5 years plan? We will know about the development policies in different sectors. Development policies in different sectors such as agriculture, industrial from 1950 to 1990. Learn to think about the merits and limitations of this regulation economy. The central objective of planning in India is to initiate a process of development which will raise the living standards and open out the people new opportunities for a richer and more varied life. First 5 years plan. Okay. Introduction. On 15th August 1947, India woke to new dawn of freedom. Finally, we were masters of our own destiny. After some 200 years of the British rules, the job of nation building was now to our own hands. The leaders of India, independent India, has to decide, among the other things, the type of economic system most suitable for our nation. A system which would promote the welfare of all rather than a few. There are different type of economic systems, and among them socialism appealed to Jawaharlal Nehru the most. However, it was not in favor of this kind of the socialism established in the former Soviet Union, where all the means of production, for example, all the factories and farms in the country were owned by the government. There was no private property. It is not possible in a democratic like India for the government to change the ownership pattern of the land and other properties of its citizens in the way that was done in the former Soviet Union. Nehru and many other leaders and thinkers of the newly independent India sought an alternative to the extreme version of the capitalism and socialism. Basically, sympathizing with this socialist outlook, they sought the answers in an economic system which in their view combined to the best features of the socialism without its drawback. In this view, India would be socialist society with a strong public sector, but also with private property and democracy. The government would plan for the economy with the private sector being encouraged to be part of the plan effort. Industrial policy revolution of 1948 and the directive principle of Indian Constitution reflected this outlook. In 1950s, the Planning Commission was set up with the Prime Minister as its chairperson. Okay, Planning Commission, Prime Minister as chairpersons. In this era, the 5 years plan had begun. Okay, so work these out. Work చేయాల్సింది nothing. Look at this box. Type of economic systems. How many types of economics we have? Okay, every society has have to answer 3 questions. What are they? What goods and services should be produced in country? Which type of goods and services? Okay, how should the goods and services be produced? How? What? How? Okay, should produced use more human labor or more capital for producing things? Okay, how should we the goods and services to be distributed among people? Okay, what goods and services should be produced and how the goods and services produced, and how should the goods and services to distribute should be produced? Okay, and distribute. Okay, one answer to this question is to depend on market force of supply and demand. It's depend on market force of supply and demand. Okay, in a market economy, also called capitalism, market economy also called capitalism, only these consumer goods will be produced what are the demand. Okay, for example, goods that can be sold profitably either in the domestic or in the foreign markets. If the car are in a demand, cars will be produced, and if bicycles are in a demand, bicycles will be produced. If the labor is cheaper than capital, more labor. Okay, if labor is cheaper than capital, more labor intensive methods of production will be used, and vice versa. In a capitalist society, the goods produced are distributed among people not on the basis of the what people need, but on the basis of purchasing power. The goods produced are distributed among peoples not on the basis of what people need, but on the basis of purchasing power. The ability to buy goods and services. Yeah. What is that is one has to have the money in this pocket to buy it. Low cost housing for the poor is much needed, but will not count as a demand in the market sense. Why? Because the poor do not have the purchasing power to the back the demand. As a result, this commodity will not be produced and supplied as per market force. Such a society did not appeal to Jawaharlal Nehru, our first Prime Minister, for it meant that the great majority of the people of this country would be left behind without the chance to improve their quality of life. A socialist society, this is capitalist society. Okay, in a socialist society answers the 3 questions in a totally different manner. A socialist society was a government to decide what goods to be produced in the accordance with the needs of society. It assumes that the government knows what is goods for the people of the country, and so then desire to individuals consumers are not given much importance. The government decides how goods to be produced and how they should be distributed. Okay. In principle, distribution under socialism is supposed to be based on what people need and not on the what they can afford to purchase. Okay, what people need and not on what the people afford to purchase. Okay. Unlike under capitalism laga capitalism. For example, a socialist nation provides free healthcare all its citizens. Strictly, a socialist society has no private properties since everything is owned by the state. In Cuba and China, for example, most of the economic activities are governed by the socialist principles. The most economics are mixed economy. The most economics are mixed economy. For example, the government and the market together answer the three questions of what to produce, how to produce, and how to distribute. What to produce, how to produce, and how to distribute. What is produced? In a mixed economy, the market will provide whatever goods and services it can produce well, and the government will produce essential goods and services which the market fail to do. Government fails, private essential provides essential goods and services. Next, what is plan? What are the economy types of economy? There are three types of economy: capital economy, and a socialist economy, and a mixed economy. What is an economy? What is a plan? A plan spells out how it a resource of the nation should be put to use. It should have some general goals as well as specific objects which are to be achieved within a specific period of time. Okay, to be achieved in specific period of time, and should have some general goals as well as a specific object. Okay, in India, plans were of 5 years durations and we called 5 years plan. Okay, 5 years plan. We borrowed this from the former Soviet Union. From Soviet Union. Okay, the pioneer in nation planning. Okay, our plan documented up to the year 2017 not only specify the objective to be attained in the 5 years plan, but also what is to be achieved over a period of 20 years. This long-term plan is called perspective plan. What is this? What is to be achieved over 20 years? This plan is called perspective plan. The 5 years plans were supposed to provide the basis on this perspective plan. It will be unrealistic to be expected all the goals of the plan to be given equal importance in all the plans. In fact, the goals may actually be a conflict. For example, the goals of introducing modern technology may be conflict with the goal of increasing employment. If the technology reduced need for labor, the planner have to balance the goals. A very difficult job ensued. We find different goals being emphasized in different plans in India. India's first plan did not spell out how much of each and every goods and services to be produced. This is the possible, not necessary. The former Soviet Union tried to do this and failed. Okay. It is enough that the plan is specified about the sectors where it plays a commanding role of instant power generation and irrigation while laying the rest of to the market. Next, what is plan? Plan is a 5 years plan taken from the Soviet Union. Okay, these are two. And this perspective plan, 5 years plans. Okay, taking the goals of 5 years plans. What are the goals of the 5 years plan? So, the plan should have some clear specific goal. Yes, every plan has clear specific goals. The goals of the 5 years were growth, modernization, self-realization, reliance, and equity. The 5 years plan were growth, modernization, self-reliance, and equity. This does not mean that all the plans have given equal importance to all these goals. Due to limited resources, a choice has to be made in each plan about which of these goals is to be given primarily importance. Nevertheless, the planners have to ensure that as far as possible, the policies of these plans do not contract these 4 goals. Let us now learn about these goals planning in some detail. For example, first one, goal. Okay, growth. First goal. It refers to increase in the country's capacity to produce the output of the goods and services within the country. It implies either a larger stock of the production capital or a larger size of supplying service like transport and banking, or any increase in the efficiency of productive capitals and services. Okay, it refers to increase in the country's capacity to produce the output of goods and services within the country. Yeah, and implies either the largest stock of the production capitals or the largest services supporting services like transport and banking, or an increase in this efficiency of the productivity capital and services. A good indicator for economic growth in this language economy instead increase in this growth domestic product, increase gross domestic products, GDP. The GDP is the market value of all final GDP is market value of all final goods and services produced in the country during a year. You have studied this concept in class 10th as well. You can think of the GDP as a cake with growth, an increase in the size of the cake. If the cake is larger, more people can enjoy it. It is necessary to produce more goods and services that the people of India are to enjoy. The word of the first 5 years plan. A more rich and varied life. The GDP of country is derived from the different sectors of this economy, namely the agriculture sector. This is the primary sector, okay, and the industrial sector, secondary, and service sector, tertiary sector, and contribute maybe each of these sectors make up the structural compositions of this economy. In some countries, growth in agriculture contributes more to the GDP growth, while in some countries the growth is the service sector contributes more to growth. A few countries Agriculture contributes more to GDP growth, and some countries or service sector contributes more growth. Okay. Okay. Next, modernization. What is modernization? To increase the productions of goods and services, the producers have to adopt new technology. Modernization is nothing but adaptation of technology, new technology. For example, farmer can increase the output of the farm by increasing the output of the farm by using new seed varieties. For example, we read about yield, high yield, okay, of using the old ones. Similarly, factors can be increased output by the using a new type of machine. Adaptation of new technology is called modernization. Adaptation of new technology is called as modernization. However, modernization does not refers only to the use of new technology but also to be change in social outlook such as a recognition that women should have the same right as men. In traditional society, women are supposed to remains at home while men work. A modern society makes use of the talented women in the workplace, in bank, factories, schools, etc. And such as society is a most commercials, it's also perspectives and self-reliance. A nation and promote economic growth and modernizations by using its own resources or by using resources imported from other nations. The nation can promote economic growth and modernizations by using its own resources or maybe using productions from their nations. Okay. The first 7 5 years plan give importance to the self-reliance, which means the avoiding imports of those goods which could vary it called India. The policy was considered the necessary to order to reduce our dependence on foreign countries. This policy was considered as necessary to order to reduce our dependence on foreign countries, especially for food. Okay, it is understandable that people who were recently freed from foreign domination should give importance to self-reliance. Further, it was feared that dependence on important food supplies, foreign technologies, and foreign capitals may make Indian sovereignty vulnerable to foreign interference in our policies. Equity. Now, growth, modernizations, and self-reliance by themselves may not improve to kind of the life which people are living. The country can have high growth, the most modern technology developed in the country itself, and also have most of the people living in poverty. It is important to ensure that benefits of the economic perspective reach the poor sections as well instead of being enjoyed only by the rich. So, in addition to growth, modernization and self-reliance, equity is also important. Every Indian should be able to meet his or her basic needs such as food, yeah, a decent house, education, and health care. About inequality in the distributions of the wealth should be reduced. Let us now see how the first 7 5 years plan, considering the period 1950 to 1990, the attempt to attain these four goals and the extent to be which they succeed, and during so, with the reference of the agriculture, industrial and trade, you will study the policies and development issues taken up after 1991 in chapter 3. So, first one. Mohalanobius, the architect of Indian planning. Architect of Indian planning. Who is he? Mohalanobius. Mohalanobius. The many distinguished thinkers contribute to the formation of India 5 years plan. Among them, the nation of the statistician Prashant Chandra Mohananobius stand out. Prashant Chandra Mohalanobius. Okay. Planning in the real sense of the term begin with the second 5 years plan. Planning in the real sense of term begin with the second 5 years plan. The second plan, the landward contribute to the development of farming in general, laid down the basics India regarding goals of India planning. This planning was based on the base of the Mohalanobius. That has a sense that can be regarding to the architect of Indian planning. Mohalanobius was born in 1893 in Calcutta. He was educated at President's College in Calcutta and Cambridge University in England. His contribution to the subject of statistics brought his international fame. In 1945, he was made a fellow member of British Royal Society, one of the most prestigious organizations of the scientists. Only the most understanding scientists are made members in this society. Mohalanobius established the Indian Statistic Institution ISIS in Calcutta and started a journey, Sankhya, which still serves as a respected form of statisticians to discuss their ideas. Both the ISIS and Sankhya which still serves as a respective forum as the statisticians to discuss their ideas. Okay. ISI and Sankhya are highly regarded by the statisticians and economists all over the world in this day. During the second plan period, Mohalanobius invited many distinguished economists from India and abroad to advise in Indian economic development. Some of these economists become Nobel Prize winners later, which shows that could identify individuals with talent. Among the economists invited by Mohalanobius were those who were very crucial of the socialist principle of the second plan. In other words, he was willing to listen to what his critics had to say, the mark of a great scholar. Many economics today reject the approach to planning formulated by Mohalanobius, but he will always be remembered for planning a vital role in putting India on the road to economic progress, and statisticians continue to profit from his contribution to establish theory. So, Sukamoy Chakravarti, Mohalanobius, Prashant Chandra in a journey to okay. The service sector. What is service sector? As a country develops, it undergoes structural change. In this case, India is a structural change in Peculiar. Usually, with development, the share of agriculture declined and the share of industries became dominant. At a higher level of the development, the service sector contribute more to the GDP than the other two sectors. In India, the share of agriculture in the GDP was more than 50%, as one would export for the poor country, but by 1990s the share of the service sector was 40.59%. More than that, the agriculture and industrial, like what we find in the development nations, this phenomena of a growing share of the service sector was accelerated in this post 1991 period. This marked in this onset of globalizations in this country, which will be discussed in chapter 3. Hi, hello, how are you? Agriculture. Okay. We have learnt in chapter 1 that during the colonial rule there was neither growth nor equity in this agriculture sector. The policymakers and independent India has to be address these issues, which they did not through land reforms and from the use of high yield varieties seeds. High yield variety seeds used in the revolutions in Indian agriculture. Govinda Crone. Land reforms. At the time of independence, the land tenure system was characterized by intermediaries. Variously called jamindars, jagirdars, who merely collected rent from the actual tiller of the soil without contribution towards importance of this farm. The low productivity of the agriculture sectors forced India to import food from the United States of the America. Equity in agriculture called for land reforms. Equity in agriculture is called for land reforms, with primarily refer to change to ownership of the landlings. Just a year after independence, steps were taken to abolish intermediaries and make the tillers the owners of the land. The idea behind these moves was that ownership of the land would give incentives. What is incentives? Ownership and incentives. Okay. To be tailored to invest in market improvement to provide sufficient capital was made available to them. Land sealing, land reforms, land sealing. What is ownership and incentives? The policy of land to tiller is based on the idea that cultivated will take more interest. They will have more incentives. They will have more incentives. In increased output of they are the owner of the land. This is because ownership of the land enables the tiller to make profit from the increased output. Tenants do not have the incentives to make improvements in land since it is the landowner who would benefit more from higher output. The importance of ownership is providing incentives is well illustrated by this carelessness with which farms of the farmers the Soviet Union used to pack fruits for sale. It was not uncommon to see farmers packing rotten fruits along with the fresh fruits in the same box. Now, every farmer knows that the rotten fruit will spoil, the fresh fruits will then are packed together. This will be also loss of the farmers since the fruits cannot be sold. So, why did the Soviet farmers do something which would so obviously results in the loss for them? The answer lies in this incentives facing the farmers. Since farmers in the former Soviet unions did not own any land, they neither enjoyed the profit nor the cost of the farmers to be benefit, which also explain the poor performance of the agricultural sectors in the Soviet Union despite availability of fair area of the high fertile land. Land ceiling. Land ceiling was another policy to promote equity in the agriculture sectors. This means fixing the maximum size. This means fixing the maximum size of land which could be owned by an individuals. The purpose of land ceiling was to reduce the concentration of the land owners in a few hands. Okay. The abolition of the intermediaries meant that some 200 lakhs tenants came into direct contact with the government. They were thus freed from being exploited by the jamindars. The owners conferred on tenants give them the incentives to increase output and these contributed to growth in agriculture. However, the goal of equity was not fully served by the abolitions of intermediaries. In some areas, the jamindars
పరిచయం అయింది నాకు గ్రాడ్యుయేషన్ చేసి మాట్లాడి తీయమని అంటే మాట్లాడాను ఇంకా దీపక్ వెళ్తే నేను ఇంకా పుట్టుబడి
continue to own large area of land by making use of some loopholes in the legislations. There were cases where tenants were provided and the landowners claimed to be self-cultivated and claiming ownership of this land, and even when these titles got ownership of the land, the poorest of these agriculture laborers such as sharecroppers and landless laborers did not benefit from this land reforms. Okay. The land ceiling litigations also faced hurdles. The big landlords challenged the legislations in this court, delaying its implementations. They used this delay to register their lands in the name of the close relatives, thereby escaping from the legislations. The legislations also had a lot of loopholes, which were exploited by these big landlords to be retain their land. Land reforms were successful in this Kerala, West Bengal, because these states had government committee committed to these policies of the land to be tailored. Unfortunately, other states did not have the same level of the commitments and vast inequalities in landholding continues to this day. Okay, the Green Revolution. At independence, about 75% of the country's population was dependent on agriculture. Okay, productivity is the agriculture sectors was very low because the use of old technology and the absence of requirement infrastructures for the vast majority of the farmers. India's agriculture vitally depends on the monsoon. And if the monsoons fell short, the farmers were in troubles unless they had access to irrigation facilities, which few had. The stagnation in agriculture during the colonial rule was permanently broken by this Green Revolution. This refers to the largest increase of the productions of the food grains resulting from the use of high yield variety seeds, especially for this wheat and rice. The use of these seeds requires this use of the fertilizers and okay, these type of seeds requires the use of fertilizers and pesticides in the correct quantities as well as a regular supply of the water. The application of these inputs in correct proportions is vital. The farmer who could benefit for the high yield seeds required reliable irrigation facilities as well as the financial resources to be purchase fertility and pesticides. As a result, in this first phase of the Green Revolutions, approximately in 1960 up to mid 1970, the use of high-yield variety seeds was restricted to the more affluent states such as Punjab, Andhra Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu. For the use of high-yield variety seeds primarily benefited the wheat growing regions only. The second phase of the Green Revolutions, mid 1970 to mid 18. First phase 60 to 70, second phase 70 to 80. Technology spreads a larger number of states and benefits more varieties of crops. This spread of Green Revolution's technology enabled India to achieve self-sufficiency in food grains. India no longer had to be not the mercy of America or any other nations of the meeting of its food requirement. Growth in agriculture's output is important, but it's not enough. If a large proportions of this increase consumed by the farmers themselves instead of being sold in this market, the higher output will not make much difference to the economy as a whole. If on the other hand, a substantial amount of this agriculture produced is sold in this market by the farmers, the higher output can be different to the economy. The portion of agriculture produce which is sold in this market by the farmers is called marketed supply. The proportion of agricultural product which is sold in this market is the marketed supply. A good proportion of the rice and wheat produced during the Green Revolution period. A good proportion of the rice and wheat produced during the Green Revolution period available marketed surplus was sold by the farmers in this market. Okay. A result of this price of this food grains declined relative to other items of the consumption. The low-income groups will spend a large percentage of their incomes on food, benefited from this decline in relative prices. The Green Revolution enabled to the government to produce a sufficient amount of the food grains to build a stock which would be used in times of food shortage, which the nation had immensely benefited from this green revolutions. The technology involved was not free from risk. One such risk was possibility that is would increase the disparities between small and big markets, since only the big farmers could afford that requirement input, thereby reaping most of the benefits of the green revolution. However, the high yield variety crops were also more prone to attacked by the pests, and the small farmers who adopted this technology could lose everything in this pest attack. Further, these fears did not come true come true because of the steps taken by the government. The government provides loans at the low interest rates. The government provides low interest rates to small farmers and abolished fertilizers so that wealthy farmers could also have access to needed inputs. Since the small farmers could obtain these requirement inputs, the output of the small farmers equaled the output in the large farm in the course of time. As a result, the green revolution benefits the small as well as the rich farmers. This risk was the small farmers being ruined when the pest attack their crops was considerably reduced by the service rendered by the research institutions established by the government. You should note that this green revolution would have favored the rich farmers only if the state did not play an extensive role in ensuring that small farmers also gained from the new technology. The debate over subsidies. The debate over subsidies. The economic justification of the subsidy in the agriculture is at present a hotly debated question. It was greenly agreed that it was necessary to use a substitute to provide the incentives for the adaptation of the new HYV high yield variety technology by farmers in general and small farmers in particular. The technology will looked upon as being a risk of farmers. Subsidies were therefore need encourage farmers to test a new technology. Some technologists believe that one of the technologies found profitable and its widely adopted subsidy should be phased out since the purpose he had served for the subsidy was a mean to be benefits the farmers, but the substantial amount of fertilizer substitute also benefits to fertilizer industries. And hello everyone, hi. How is going on? And among farmers, the subsidy largely benefits of the farmers in this more perspective reasons. Therefore, it is argued that there is no case of the continuous fertilizers subsidies. It does not benefit the larger group and it is an unburden, burden of the government financial. On the other hand, some believed that the government should continue with agriculture subsidies because farming in India continues to be a risky business. Most farmers are very poor and they will not be able to afford the requirement inputs without subsidies. Eliminating subsidies will increase the inequalities between rich and poor farmers and violate the goal of equity. These experts argued that if the subsidies are largely benefited in fertilizer industries and big farmers. The correct policy is not abolish subsidies but to take steps to ensure that only the poor farmers enjoy the benefits. Thus, by the late 1960s, the Indian agricultural productivity has increased substantially to enable to the country to be self-sufficient in food grains. This is an achievement to be proud of. On this negative side, some 65% of this country's population continue to be employed in agriculture even late as the 1990s. Economics has found that was a nation becomes a more perspectives prosperous. The proportion of the GDP contributed by the agriculture was as well as the proportion of population working in these sectors declined considerably. In India between 1950s and 1990s, the proportion of the GDP contributed by the agriculture declined significantly, but not the population to depend on this 67.5% in 1950 to 64.9% by 1990. Why was there such a large proportion of this populations engaged in agriculture? Although agricultural output could have growth with much less people working in this sector. The answer is that the industrial sector and service sectors did not observe the people working in these agriculture sectors. Many economists call this an important failure of our policies following during 1950 to 1990. Prices and signals. Industry and trade. Economists have economics economists have found that poor nation can progress only if they have a good industrial sector. Industry provides employment which is more stable than the employment in the agriculture. If proportion modernizations and overall prosperity, it is for this reason that the 5 year plans placed a lot of emphasis on industrial development. You might have studied that the previous chapter that the time of independence, the variety of industries was very narrow, largely confined to cotton textiles and jute. There were two managed iron and steel firms, and the Jamshedpur and the other in Kolkata. But obviously, we needed to expand these industries was based with a variety of industries if the economics was a growth. Public and private sectors in India industrial development. The big questions facing the policymakers was what should be the role of the government and private sectors in the industrial development. At this time, the independence India industrialists did not have the capital to understand investment in India industrial ventures required for this development for this Indian economy. Nor was the market big enough to encourage industrialists to undertake major projects even if they had the capital to do so. If it is principally for those reasons that the as well the government had to play an intensive role in the promoting the industrial sector. In addition, the decisions to develop the Indian economy on socialist lines let the policy of the government contribute the government heights of the economy. As a 5 years, the economy as a second 5 years plan put it. This means that the government would have complete control over the industries that were vital for the economy. This policy of this private sector should have to be complementary to those of this public sector, with the public sector leading the way. Industrial policies resolution. Industrial policies resolution. The accordance with this goal of the state controlling the commandment heights of the economy, the Industrial Policies Resolution of the 1956 was adopted. These resolutions formed the basis of the second 5 years plan, the plan which tried to build the basics of the socialist patterns of the society. This resolution classified industries into three categories. The first category is comprised industries which would to exclusively owned by the government. The second category, the first category owned by the government, and the second category considers the industrials which is the private sector could be supplement the effort of this public sector, which the government taken the sole responsibility of the units. The third category considered of the remaining industries which were in this private sector. Okay, although where as a category of the industries left to the private sectors of the sector was kept under state control through a system of license. No new industries was allowed unless a license was obtained from the government. This policy was used for the promoting industries in the backward regions. It was easier to obtain a license of the industries unit was established in these economically backward areas. In addition, such units were given certain concessions such as tax benefits and electricity at the lower tariff. The purpose of this policy was to promote general equality. Okay. Even an existing industries has to obtain a license of expanding output of the four diversifications production produce a new variety of the good diversifying production. This was meant to ensure that the equality of the goods produced was not more than what the economy required. License to expand production was given only if the government was convinced that the economy requires a larger quantity of goods. Small scale industries. In 1955, the village of the Small Scale Industries Committee, also called the Curve Committee, noted the possibility of this using small scale industries of this promoting rural development. A small scale industry is a dependence which refers to the maximum investment allowed of this asset of the unit. This limit was changed over the period of the time. In 1950, a small scale industries units was one of the invested a maximum of rupees 5 lakhs. At present of the maximum investments allowed in the rupees present the maximum investment allowed to rupees 1 crore. It is believed that small scale industries are more labor intensive. Small scale industries are more labor intensive. They use more labor than the large scale industries and therefore generate more employment. But these industries cannot promote the big industries firms. It is obvious that development is a small scale industries required them to shielded from the large firms. For this purpose of this productions, production of the number of conduct was the reserve of the small scale industry. The criteria of the reservations belong to the abolition of the ability of these units to manufacture the goods. They were also given concessions such as lower excise duty and bank loans at the lowest interest rates. Trade policy importance. Trade policy importance substitutions. The industrial policy was the Indians adopted was closely related to the trade policy. It is the first seven plans. It is the first seven plans trade was characterized by this commonly called the inward-looking trade strategies. The technology, it's inward. The technology strategy is called import substitution. Okay, this policy aimed to replace or substitute imported with domestic production. For example, instead of importing vehicles made in a foreign country, industries would be encouraging to produce them in India itself. In this policy, the government protected the domestic industries from the foreign competitions. The protection from the imported took two forms: tariffs and quotas. Tariffs are taxes. Tariffs are taxes on imported goods, and they make imported goods more expensive and discourage their use. Quotas, especially, what is quota? Quota specifies the quantity of goods which can be imported. The effects of the tariffs and quotas is the restriction importance and therefore protecting the domestic firms from the foreign competitions. The policy. The policy of protection was based on the nations that industries of the development countries were not in positions to be compete against these goods productions by more development economies. It was assumed that if the domestic industries were protected, they could learn to compete in this course of time. Our planners also feared that possibilities of the foreign exchange being the spend of this important luxury goods not restricted ways placed in the note importance. Nor was there any serious thoughts given to promote export until the mid 1980s. Effects of policies on industrial development. The achievement of Indian industrial sectors during the first seven plans of impressions indeed the proportion of GDP contributed by the industrial sectors increased in the percent period of the 13% in 50 to 24.16. Oh, 13% to 24.6, almost double. The rise in this industry's share GDP is an important indicator of the development. The 6% of the annual growth rate of this industry sectors during the period of commandments. No longer was Indian industry restricted largely to cotton, textiles, and jute. In fact, the industrial sectors become well diversified by the 1990s, largely used to the public sector. The promotion of the small scale of the industries gave the opportunities to these people who did not have the capital to start large farms to get into business. Protection from the foreign competitions enabled the development of indigenous industries in this area of electronics and automobile sectors which otherwise could not have developed. In spite of these contributions made by the public sectors to the growth of the Indian economy, some economists criticize of this performance of this many public sectors entrepreneurs. It was proposed at this beginning of this chapter that initiate public sectors. was required a big way. It is now widely held that state entrepreneurs continues to produce certain goods and services, often monopolize them, although this was not longer required. An example of this provision of the telecommunication service, this industry continues to be served for this public sectors, even after it was realized that private sector firms could be provided it. Due to the absence of the competitions, even till the late 1990s, one had to wait for the long time to get a telephone connection. Another instead could be the establishment of the modern a bread manufacturing firms, as in the private sector, could not manufacture its bread. In 2001, this firm was sold to private sector. The point of this, after 4 decades, the planning development of the Indian economy, no constitutions was made between what the public sector can do and what the private sector can also do. For example, even now, only the public sector supplies national defense and even though private sector can manage hotels well, yet the government also runs hotels. This had led some scholars argued that the state should get out the area which the private sectors can manage it, and the government may concentrate it resolves all the important services which the private sector cannot provide. Many public sectors firms incurred huge losses but continued to function because it is difficult to close the government undertaking if it's drain on the nation's limited resource. This does not mean that private firms that are always profitable. Indeed, quite of the genres of public sector originally private firms which were all larger or the closer due to losses. They were then nationalized the protection of the jobs of these workers. However, the loss making private firms will not waste resources by using kept running despite the losses. The need to obtain a license to start industry was misused by industrial houses. A big industries would get a license not to the starting a new firm, but prevent competitors from starting new firm to consist. A regulation of this came to be called the permittive license Raj. A big industrialist could get license not excuses regulations of the what came to be called permit license laws prevent certain firms from the becoming more efficiency. More time was spent by the industrialist in trying to obtain the license or lobby with the considered ministers rather than the thinking about the how the implement of this produce. The protections the protection farms foreign competitors was also being criticized on this ground, but this continues over after it proved to do more than half the good. Due to restrictions on imported, the Indian consumers had to purchase whatever the Indian produce. produce. The producers were aware of this hard capital market, so they had no intentions to improve the quality of goods. Why should they think the import improving equity when they could spell low quality items at the high prices? Competitions would find causes over the produce more difference. A new economics also finds that people's sectors are not meant of earning profits but to promote the welfare of this nation. The public sector's firms, on this view, should be evaluated on the basis of the extent to which they contribute to the welfare of the people and not at the profit they earn. Regarding production, some economists hold that we should protect our produce from the foreign competitors as well as the rich nations continues to do so. Owing to these all conflict, economists called for the change in this our policies. This, along with these problems, led the government in industries was a new economic policy in 1991. Conclusion. The progress of the Indian economy during the first 7 plans was impressive indeed. Our industries become the far derived compared to the situations and independence. India becomes self-sufficient in food production thanks to the Green Revolution. Land reforms are suitable in the abolition of the hated Jamindari system. In the industrial system, many economic becomes disqualified with the performing of many public sectors entrepreneurs excuses government's regulations prevents the growth of the entrepreneurships. In this name of self-reliance, India producers were protected against foreign competitors, and these did not give them to incentives to improve the quality of goods that they produced. India policies were inward orientations that failed to develop a strong export sector. This need for reforms and economical policies was widely felt in this context of the changing global economic scenarios, and the new economic policy was initiated in 1991 to make India's economy more efficient. This is the subject of this chapter. Okay, recaps. After independence, India inverted the economic system which combines to the best features of the socialism and capitalism. This culminated in the Mexican economics model. All this economics planning was formatted through 5 years plan. Common goals of the 5 years plans are the growth, modernization, self-sufficiency and equality. The major policy initiatives in the agriculture sectors were land reforms and green revolution. These initiatives helped India to become self-sufficient in food grains productions. The proportion of the people depending on the agriculture did not decline as expected. Import, import substitutions policies initiatives in industrial sectors raised in the contributions of GDP. One of the major drawbacks in this industrial sector was the insufficient functions of the public sectors as well started incurring losses leading to drain of the nation's limited resource. Defined plan, why did plan opted in India?